Alright, got people showing up. Good, good. Okay. Well, I guess to start this off, I have made a number of changes since last time. Well, you look down here, you'll notice that the foot rig here looks completely different, or not really completely different, it's just been added on to significantly. Did some here that I really should have done from the start and would have saved me a lot of hassle, but I added some extra controls to the foot rig. If you look for this channel on YouTube, a guy named Darren Lyle, he does these really good Blender tutorials, and one of the things he goes over is how to make this foot rig here. And it looks kind of complex, but it's actually really kind of basic, but it allows just so much control. If you look at these parts right here, these sort of spurs that come out, if you move these, you can see here like rocks on the heel, and then it comes up on the ball of the foot, but it still keeps it level to the ground. And that's a lot easier than messing around with the bone itself, which like normally whenever you rotate it, it ends up kind of like going into the floor, whereas this keeps it pretty much at the same point, and then everything else just sort of moves around it. And it's extremely helpful, something I should have done a lot earlier, but I'm an idiot. But yeah, it just makes the animations look a lot nicer, and also makes them easier to produce. And let's see here. Also made some pretty big changes to the game itself. If you hear that crunching sound in the background, that is Spencer having some kibble. But I know for a while I've been doing this as sort of a full-on action RPG, but I've kind of wanted to go back to the original idea that I had, where I wanted to have the combat be kind of like the game White Knight Chronicles. Not exactly, but I had done that style at first with this, but I don't know, just the action RPG thing, while it's kind of nice, it's just also feels kind of basic in a way. But I did keep all the code for it still there. It's just been commented out, and I've got the stuff for this in its place. And actually, no, let me remove this here. I was experimenting with some things. Experimenting with fire effects right here. Let's turn that off. But let's just get into the game here. Actually, one thing you may notice right now is that notice the tails have more of a natural sway to them now. They don't just like move as one solid piece all at once. Each segment of it is kind of on a delay from the next. So like, first one rotates into place, then one behind it, and just follows on that way, and it produces just this nice little swaying effect. But if we go into combat, first of all, I changed the target reticle some. You can see that. But when I click, First of all, you may notice I changed the lock on here. You can still move and rotate around with this, but you'll notice it kind of moves to keep the enemy still on screen. And as you either, get closer or move further away, the screen zooms out in order to accommodate. And you can see the dial there fill up. That was what its original purpose was before I made it into kind of a makeshift HP bar there for a while. So one thing you may notice is that while I'm locked onto the enemy, notice that the character's head is constantly facing them. Not when he turns around like this, but you can see that while he's locked on, the character will actually look at the enemy. And that's actually a nice little thing that's actually just built into Unity. It's something that you can just sort of turn on and off as you want with humanoid rigs, which is what these are, even though they have the additional parts to them. You can see the dial there fills up. And one thing I did is, for this combat, even if you are far away from the enemy and you click the button, I did not press anything right there. The character just automatically gets into position according to what the attack range is. And they have a bit of a different attack animation. Character doesn't walk forward while doing it. It's just a simple 2-hit slash. Actually, also, if you go into here, I still have all the character control stuff right here. However, I also have a second script attached to them, which is user input. I decided to actually have the user input be its own thing that just sends values to the character control script, because what I'd like to do is be able to, so when you're in combat or even just in the game period, you can switch between the partners that you have. So you don't have to just play as your character. You can also switch around and play around with each character's sort of unique skills and everything. And this will help facilitate that. Ideally, what I want to have happen is when you switch over, this script will essentially turn off, and then an AI script will turn on in its place. And then, likely for whatever character you take control of, the user input script on it will activate, and its AI will turn off. Granted, there is a little bit of AI still in the character control script here, because for like the moving into position if you're not in attack range, that's essentially an AI function. But it's one that I figure both the user and a separate AI system can make do with. And also, for fighting a group of enemies, actually one thing I have here already, this thing right here just called game control. this is, it's not really like anywhere technically. It's just an empty game object is what it's called, but you can see here it has a script attached to it. It's the world control, and what I want to do is make it into a just sort of something that can keep track of, like, if there is an enemy that's targeting you, or how many and whatever, so that, like, say you're fighting a group of enemies, and this will actually keep a list of each enemy that is currently in combat. So once you're done with fighting one, you'll automatically not lock onto the next one. And also right now this controls the AP, which is just sort of like the action points, if you will. It's just the amount of the dial that's filled. So you see right now the max for it is 3. That's 3 seconds that you have to wait for it to fill up. And then the gain right here, this will just be either one of two numbers. This will be either 1 or 0. And all this is just, like, say you're performing a special move that, like, has its own sort of, like, unique animation sequence. What this does is, you can turn this off, and then essentially everything that's here, they'll stop gaining any AP for the period that it's set to 0. Currently it's really unimplemented, but just I have it there for the future. And anyways, I'm working on here. One thing is that this area down here, it's incomplete right now. It's going to be essentially your list of skills and attacks, and you can, they'll light up and highlight depending on which one that you're selecting. I'm still getting the bugs out. It's still a work in progress. Except that, when you actually go in, this changes. So it goes from attack text to slash, which that's just a value that I added onto the weapon. If I see here, objects, items. You have just an attack name part in here, and all it does is just looks at this, and then it renames that accordingly. And also you have the attack range in it. This is set to 0.8. I figure, like, a spear, that'll have obviously a higher range value to it. Not so much with the blades. I mean, my goal for them is to be, they hit fast, like, they do. They have two. They have 2 damage calls per animation. But the downside to them is that you need to get really close to enemies to use them. And you can see here there's still all the values for the hitbox and everything that I was using. And actually, one thing I've noticed is that since changing this around, I have gotten some much better frame rates with this. You see up here in the graphics, it's kind of, it fluctuates quite a bit in the editor, but you can see here I'm getting like 80 I'm getting in like the 80s, 90s. I've actually gotten even triple digit frames before. And actually, if you don't really know what frame rate has to do with, I can explain it. because frame rates is one of those really sort of nerdy things that you'll often hear people like me complaining about when it's under 60. But essentially, a lot of people think that frame rates is purely a graphical thing, and it's really not. Games essentially run on stop motion, if you can imagine it that way. And just, you know how stop motion works. You know, it's take a picture of something, you know, and you gradually change it with each image, and that's essentially how this works. And every time that every screenshot, if you can think of it that way, is a frame. Or in other words, if you use the function right here, update, every time that the computer runs through the update function of every single script that's currently going, that's a frame. So obviously, higher frame rates means, it can run through more cycles of this per second. And obviously that has some, there's some advantages and disadvantages. Obviously the advantage is that, if it's really high, you can have, a whole bunch of things all happening at once. But the downside is that whenever whenever this frame rate fluctuates, because you notice it wasn't staying at just a solid number. Each time that it fluctuates, it's going to change the values, because that's an additional cycle that's going through. So you're trying to find an example of how. Okay, if I go in here. Here we go. Okay, like if you notice this here, this is a script that moves the player around. See how it works is it sets the velocity of the character. Now, the downside to having like a lot of frames or having frames that vary a lot is that each time it goes through, if you have just a flat value, it's going to increment it by that value every single time. So you can end up with the character like moving really weirdly. Like if the frame rate's high, they'll suddenly like speed up immensely, and, when it's low, vice versa. However, the way that you correct that, at least in Unity, is by multiplying it, or whatever value that you want, by just this part. It's a simple little function, time.delta time. What this is this gets the time that has elapsed between each frame. And what this does makes it so that, whatever value, like it doesn't really make it time independent. What it does is it's either sort of multiplying or dividing the outcome by how many frames or the time that's elapsed between frames. That way, like within the same course of time, you'll get the same outcome in the end. So whether it's running at 30 frames per second or 60, if you have it going for, say, a minute, then the character is going to end up on, like, the same place in the world regardless. And it's just a really handy little thing that Unity has. Because one thing that Unity doesn't do is that you can't lock it to a specific frame rate, which is kind of weird. I mean, it's there's advantages and disadvantages to everything. I guess in the end, the way the Unity does it isn't bad. It does make it so that regardless of whether you're running something on good hardware or bad hardware, you can still more or less play the game as it's intended. And script to lock to a certain FPS. I don't want to say there isn't one, because I mean, of course, there's the asset store right here. There's all sorts of plugins and additions that people have made to Unity. So I don't want to say that it doesn't exist, but I certainly haven't found a way to do it with just the default stuff that it gives you, which again, it's not really a bad thing. I do kind of like the way that it does it, but it would be nice to maybe at least have that option. Let's see here. What else is I gonna talk about here? I know I changed some more things. Here we go. Yeah, this is just the animator for the default character. You can see these red triangles here. Right here, this one, the attack one near. This is just that basic, double swipe that I just showed. And these are all the animations from the previous version here. The red arrow just means that it's muted. In other words, you can't access it. And I'm just keeping them around for the time being, just in case. And actually, one thing I should elaborate on here. This is just the user control script right here. If I view it here, you can see here the character control script. It has like all these different values here that you can tinker with, modify, and that all. Some of them get changed while it's running. But if you just look at the user input script, it's really simple. There's nothing really there. And it's just a very nicely self-contained little script. It just gets some, basic input from the user. It gets like, the direction that you're pressing and everything. And it more or less, a lot of it was just copied and pasted from where it used to be on the character control script. Yeah, you can see all. And it just like, it's really just kind of a series of if statements right now. And it just, all it really does is it's just a way to set all the values that are in here from here. which actually an advantage to this is that again, you can have multiple update functions that essentially run simultaneously, more or less. Like, look here, even though this script is a derivative of the status entity script, if you have an update function in the script that it's a derivative of, they don't both run simultaneously, if that makes any sense. Essentially, it can only run the what am I trying to say? My mind's just blanking on me right now. I should put this. And this is a simple way to say it is that it can only run one. You know, whatever the script is that you're currently using, you know, be it the one that's a derivative of or the one that's deriving from it, depending on which one you actually have set in the game, it can only run that one's update script. So usually the way around that is to, like, with this here, I used to have an update in here because this used to run alongside everything else. Instead, I needed to take everything and put it into its own functions, and then have these functions called from the update portion of the script that I'm actually using. However, when you actually have two separate ones that are both connected to the same object, they can both have update functions and they'll both run at the same time. So that's just something to keep in mind there. Yeah, and that can be, it can be a help and a hindrance depending. You know, in this instance, it's mostly a help, and generally you want to keep things as consolidated as possible. You usually don't want to have a whole bunch of scripts connected to one object. You typically want to pack things in as much as you can, you know, while still keeping everything, you know, mostly tidy and accessible. Yeah, this is, in this case, it's better. So I can have the update function in here, getting the player input, and I can have the update function in here, you know, just essentially running the character. I think the neighbor's dog has stopped by the front door. I'm currently babysitting my aunt's dog Lexi again, as usual. And she's a sweet dog, but it's starting to feel more like she's my dog than my aunt's at this point. And I guess a neighbor's dog is at the door, so she's excited. And probably my cat Bruiser is excited too because he loves that dog for some reason. Darn it, what was I talking about again? I guess one thing, see here, Where did I put it? Looks like I don't have it open. So let's fix that. Let's open up the script here. Yeah, currently the world script here, this just functions as a container, at least right now. But this is something that I want to preserve between areas. So you can see here, just like the character, this has the don't destroy on load function attached to it. Because, like, you know, whatever values this is set to, you know, like the max AP, because I want this to be something that you can edit. You know, it'll essentially change the game speed, like how in Final Fantasy you can change the ATB bars fill rate. Yeah, of course, this doesn't really change the rate. It just kind of gives you, you know, if you set it higher, then you have, like, you know, more time to decide on what attack or whatever to choose. So ideally, you know, once I've worked on this a little bit more, I do want to have it, you know, dynamically keep track of things like who's in combat, you know, what enemies are targeting you and everything. You know, and it'll just essentially communicate back and forth between this and the user input script. Well, actually, I don't know if I showed before, but if you can see on the orbiter here, it's kind of got some sparks that are coming from it. It's something that I figured out how to do kind of recently. It's just basically just messing with the particle system that Unity has. Same thing I was doing to make the fire. This just, all this is it's just a creates an invisible particle with a trail behind it, and when the particle appears, it kind of moves in a random direction, and so, you know, it creates these, you know, little streaks of electricity. And it just kind of gives the orbiter more of just sort of this malfunctioning look to it, which, you know, is what I want. At least for the ones that you fight. I do want to have some ones in the world that are actually working just fine and that, you know, don't really hurt you at all. Yeah. One thing I should... Actually, one thing I didn't mention was that since I'm doing the combat differently now, it no longer uses weapon hitboxes. It just checks for if the enemy is in range, and if it is, then it sends the attack function to it. And you maybe think that that'll mess with things I planned, like the you know, mischiefs coming after you if you accidentally attack them, and but no, actually I'm going to still have some actions that are like area of effect. So even if you're locked onto one enemy, if another one is in the area, it'll still get hit. And actually, I figure this can bring in a bit more strategy too, because I can have instances where say, like, there's a lot of enemies that you need to fight, but there's also like mischiefs nearby. So as a result, you can't rely on any area of effect skills. You need to stick to direct attacking. Actually, one thing I'm also thinking about is having it so that actually enemies can also like get mischief sent after them. Like the mischiefs are essentially sort of they're sort of a third party. They're not allies, and they're not really enemies unless you make them that. But depending on who it is that attacks them, they'll go after that person. I figured that could actually open up some very interesting possibilities. I've had a thought of maybe having them involved in some sort of a boss fight potentially, which like puzzle bosses are something that you really don't see a lot in sort of games like this. White Knight Chronicles itself, like the closest it really got to puzzle solving was being able to like attack an enemy's knees to topple it. But I'm not completely copying it. I've already got some things of my own in here, like actually being able to select an attack before the bar fills up. That's a little quality of life improvement that series surprisingly never did. You can only select an attack once the bar had filled. So you basically need to keep hammering on the X button until it filled up, lest you miss the right frame perfect input. What else should I go over? Actually, same thing I did for character tales, I also did for the mischiefs. If you look at them, see if they got the same sort of wagging tail. Now, still need to fix their animations coming into and out of their running, but that's sort of a more minor thing, at least right now. Also, I did with the trickle antenna, give them more of a bouncy look to them. It's a simple little trick, but one I didn't really figure out until recently, and I kind of feel like an idiot for not doing it sooner. And then that's, well, kind of why I'm doing this partly, is just to learn. I guess most people would be saying, if you're trying to learn game development, why are you starting right with an action RPG? And I don't really know if I have an answer. I guess I just like the idea of pushing myself. And I guess it's not like this is my first time programming. I've been doing it since I was in high school. Though it is my first time making a game. Here. See if I got any questions. Soft lock on looks a bit jank at the moment. What do you mean? I mean, granted, nothing on the HUD right now is permanent. Yeah, this is all still a work in progress. I changed the HP and MP bars slightly, but even these I'm probably not going to stick with. You know, this is just, again, it's a work in progress. I figure once everything is there and working as it should, then I can worry about the aesthetics of it. Well, actually, it's not random. The lock on here, how it works is that, first of all, depending on where your camera is pointed, you can see it changes. Basically, what it looks for is, first it looks for what's in the camera's field of view, and then it checks for which of those things in the field of view is closest to the player, and then that's the one that it will, you know, sort of soft lock onto. So there actually is a logic behind it. Yeah, it's not completely perfect right now, but I would like to give the ability to, in addition to being able to, you know, go into combat like this, I would also like to give the player the ability to, you know, actually choose an enemy to lock on to if they want. Like, say if they're using a ranged weapon and they want to focus on an enemy that's further away instead of the one that's up close. But yeah, it's like this right now, and you know, for the purposes of the game as it is currently, it works. But yeah, like everything else in here, it's definitely not final. You know, all the stuff that you're seeing in here, this isn't even like, this isn't even alpha quality yet. My Patreon updating. I don't know. I've been kind of iffy on my Patreon. Like on one hand, you know, it's nice to have money, but on the other hand, you know, as all this is currently, I don't know. I don't know. Just like a part of me feels like that I shouldn't ask money of people for, you know, what I have as it is right now. I don't know if that's just like misplaced pride or something, but yeah, just haven't really bothered with doing anything with my Patreon lately. Oh, and as for this year, like I said, partner AI is still black currently. What I want to do is have it so that when you actually choose to go into battle, like all of your partners will be updated on that decision, and they'll, go after the same enemy. Or if, say, you're just out and about and you get targeted by some enemies, then they'll be aware of that, and then they'll in turn go into battle. But yeah, right now I have them with this AI character control script. Let's work on some stuff here. Instead of using AI character control script, I can probably just use the plain old character control script that I have. Senior script, character control, summation curves, okay. And drag and drop all this stuff in. Okay, got all that in place. And let's create a new script here. This call script an AI input. And yep, it's asking me to reload. Okay, got that in. Let's look at my user input thing here. look at the things I need and things I won't need. I'll definitely need these two. And kettle going off, of course. Actually, I should probably comment that out for the time being. It'll make things a lot easier. And let's also comment out that. This is just going to make things easier for testing purposes, so I don't have to put all these things in for everything else, at least right now. Right now I'm just basing this on the user input, since it's good to have a basis for this sort of stuff. I can probably also copy all this over as just a basis. Let's make sure that I get it right here. Keep selecting too much. Damn it. There we go. Okay. So just comment that out. And I can probably, ideally what I want to do is translate all this from being, whether or not it gets user input, to instead being conditional statements. And all that just means is that I want it to, instead of basing whether to perform these actions on input, it'll just be based on if certain factors happen to be true or not. And I can probably also look into the open up Maury here. He still has the original version of this on here. AI script. All that here. Instead of the vertical and horizontal axes, instead what did I name it? Actually, I think I'll give it its own call to the nav mesh agent. Okay, how do you get that? So confusing that for nav mesh agent you need to put in all this extra stuff in order to access it. Don't know why you can't just put get component nav mesh agent. So then if the desired velocity There we go. You got that there. I do want to change the order of some of these things because I want them to check for them in a different order than from the player control. A lot of this will just be copying and pasting because why do extra work if you don't have to? Okay, get all that stuff in there. Thinking this should work as is. Just add a little something here. Oops. Okay, kind of screwed something up. Maybe I should move that over here. Oops, wrong script. fix something else here. Okay, finally. Back here and see if this works. It seems to be working. Yep, even running after me. Okay, so he's acting just like he was before, just with some different scripts. And I just realized that something's up there. Undo that part. And then give Kala his spear. Save this. Okay, now this is working good again. Obviously I still need to make some alterations, but okay, now why the heck is he just going from 0 to running? Something's still up there. Let's remove the maximize. That's fine. There we go. Now it's working right again. Don't need this part anymore. Okay, well, I managed to do a little bit today. And also show off a few of the changes that I've made. Hopefully I'll be able to fix and tinker with a bit more, and I'll have even more stuff to show you the next time that I stream here. Now actually, figuring out coding flaws in Unity is rather easy. If something goes wrong, it'll show up here on the console. You see these little stop signs here? These represent a flaw in the code. Yeah, luckily some of these, you can see I have a few errors right here, but these are actually ones that don't really matter because I'm not even using what they're associated with. Usually all I need to do is just double click on whatever it is and it'll take you to wherever the issue is in the code. Usually it's that you forgot to set a variable right, or you forgot to add a semicolon after your commands. And yeah, I'm going to be ending the stream now, but you know, hopefully I'll be able to stream tomorrow, or if not next week. I know I wasn't able to do anything the last few weeks, but I would like to try to make up for that. And obviously I haven't just been sitting around in that time. I have been changing a bunch of things, fixing things, redoing animations. But anyways, thanks everyone for showing up today, and I will see you all later.